There's a particular kind of quiet a person makes right before they decide to stop. I have heard it twice in my life. The first time I was too young and too far away to do anything but watch a man walk into the Gila with his boots on. The second time I was close enough to smell the dust on her shoulders, close enough to see the way her fingers had gone loose, not calm, but done, the way a rope goes loose after it has already held all the weight it is ever going to hold. I did not say a wise thing to her. I want that understood before I tell you the rest, because folks who hear this story later tend to make me out braver and gentler than I was. I did not have words. I had a bad knee, a dying light, a horse that would not stop chewing, and the plain animal sense that if I opened my mouth I would ruin it. So I did the only thing I knew how to do with a frightened creature that has run out of running. I sat down. I sat down beside a woman who had already said goodbye to the world in her own tongue, and I did not leave, and the sun took its slow, terrible time going down over the dragoons, and somewhere in that hour the world she had let go of came creeping back to her whether she wanted it or not. This is the story of that hour, and of what it cost me to keep her in it. I keep a little book, have done for 11 years now, since the fever winter took Della, and I found I could not fall asleep unless I'd set the day down somewhere first. It is not a diary. I have no gift for feelings on paper. What I write is the weather. April 9, wind out of the southwest, dry, clouds building over Cochise Head by noon come to nothing, cold at dark. That's a whole entry, that's a whole day so far as the book knows. Some men pray, I write down the sky. I have come to believe they are close to the same thing, a way of telling the Almighty I noticed. I was here. I saw what you did today. And when a day comes that I cannot set down in weather, when the day was too big or too strange or too much, I know it, because the book sits open on the table and the pencil rolls off and I go to bed without a word in it. The day I am about to tell you has no entry. It was the tail end of the dry season, and I had spent the better part of it losing cattle. Not to rustlers, not to wolves, to the plain arithmetic of a bad year. The Sulphur Springs grass had come up thin and gone brown by June, and every water hole I owned or borrowed had shrunk down to a plate of cracked mud with a green stink in the middle. I'd been riding fence and riding the washes, pushing what stock I had left toward the one seep-up in the Malpais that still ran, and I was doing it alone because I'd let my last hand go in the spring when I couldn't make his wages. His name was Tolliver, and he cried when I told him, and then I cried after he'd ridden off, and neither of us ever spoke of it because that is not a thing men out here are permitted to do. So it was just me. Me and a claybank mare named Juno, who I talked to more than I talked to any human person, and who had opinions about it, and who at that particular hour was more concerned with a stand of grandma grass than with anything her rider was feeling. I had come up onto the shoulder of a mesa, a flat red table of rock that folks around Sunizona called the griddle, on account of what it did to you in August, because from up there I could see the whole basin and count what water was left in it. The sun was maybe an hour off the mountains, long light, the kind that turns every ordinary thing gold and makes a man forget for a minute that he's broke. That is when I saw her. She was sitting at the very lip of the mesa where the red rock fell away into 150 feet of nothing, and then more nothing below that, a slope of scree and cholla running down into the wash. Sitting with her legs folded under her and her back straight, and her face turned toward the sun like she was waiting to be introduced to it. From a distance, I took her for a rock. Then the wind moved her hair, and I knew she was a person, and something in the way she was sitting, too still, too composed, too much like a woman who has finished all her arguing, put a cold hand on the back of my neck before my mind had even caught up to my body. I reined Juno in. The mare stopped chewing, even she felt it. I did not call out. Every instinct I had said that a shout would go through that woman like a shot, and that whatever thin thing was holding her back from the edge would let go. So I got down slow, and I looped Juno's reins over a broke stub of juniper, and I started walking toward her the way you walk toward a spooked horse in a burning barn, sideways, easy, showing my hands to a person who wasn't even looking at me. Now here is where I have to be honest with you about what I was. I was not a good Samaritan. I was a tired man, 41 years old, sunburned to leather, with a mortgage on my land held by a bank in Wilcox that would as soon foreclose as look at me. I had nothing to give anybody. And when I got close enough to see her clear, the buckskin dress gone gray with dust, the pattern of the beadwork, the moccasins, the set of her cheekbones, and I understood that she was Apache, A whole second cold hand landed on my neck, and this one was not fear for her. It was 1886, friend. You may not know what that meant out there in that particular corner of the world, and I am not going to give you a history lesson, because a history lesson is a way of standing far off from a thing. I will only tell you that the mountains all around us had been on fire with a war for years, that Geronimo and his people were being run down that very season, and that a white man found in the company of an Apache, any Apache, warrior or child or grandmother, could expect to be hung by his own neighbors and called a hero for the hanging. The army had orders. The territory had a fever in it. Fear had eaten the sense out of decent people, and I had watched it happen and told myself it was none of my affair. So when I understood what she was, every reasonable and cowardly part of me said, "Turn around. Get on your mare, ride home, you never saw her." And I will not pretend I didn't hear it. I heard it plain as a bell. I kept walking. She heard me at about 10 feet. Of course she did. I'd been fooling myself thinking I was quiet. A townsman crashing through mesquite is what I was. Her head turned just a little, and I saw her eyes for the first time. I have tried 100 times to describe those eyes to people, and I always fail. They were not wild. They were not full of hate, which is what my neighbors would have expected and half of them would have wanted. They were empty in the specific way of a house after the family has moved out. The walls still there, the shape of the rooms still there, but the life already gone somewhere else, already down the road. She looked at me the way you look at weather, something happening at a distance that has nothing to do with you. She was young, younger than I'd thought from behind, maybe 20, maybe less. There was a wound on her forearm, a long, shallow tear gone dark and angry at the edges, days old, untended. Her lips were split from thirst, and around her in a rough half-circle at the very edge of the drop she had laid out 4 small things. I could see them from where I stood. A child's moccasin worn through at the toe, a twist of cloth, a little bundle of something dried, herbs or hair I could not tell, and a broken length of cane, the kind used for a cradle board. I understood then what the 4 things were, and I understood what she had come up onto the griddle to do, and I understood that I had walked in on the last, private, most sacred hour of a person's life, and that I had no right to it at all. I stopped. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The wind came up off the basin and worked at us both. Down below, a canyon wren spilled its little falling song out over all that empty air, that sound like water going somewhere. She flinched at it, just the once. And that flinch, that small betrayal of the body, still wanting, still listening for beautiful things even now, that is the thing that decided me. A person truly done with the world does not flinch at a wren. I did not say don't. I did not say think of your family, God forgive me. Her family was laid out in front of her in 4 small pieces. I did not say any of the things a preacher would say, or a doctor, or a good man in a story. I said, that's a long way down. She looked at me. I said, I've got no earthly business being up here. I was counting my water. I've got about a week of it left, and then I don't know what I'll do. I heard myself saying it, and could not for the life of me tell you why, except that it was true, and true was all I had. Man loses his water in this country, he's finished. I keep thinking somebody ought to be angrier about it, but it's just me and my horse up here, and neither of us has the strength. I did not look at the edge. I did not look at the 4 small things. I looked out at the mountains going purple, and I lowered myself down slow on account of the knee which cracked like a green branch, and I sat. Not beside her, 6 feet off, close enough to matter, far enough to not be a threat. I sat on the hot red rock of the griddle at the top of 150 feet of nothing, next to a stranger who had come there to die, and I took off my hat because it seemed right, and I put it on my knee, and I shut my mouth. And then I did the hardest thing I have ever done, which was nothing. I'm not a patient man by nature. Della used to say I fidgeted in church so bad the widow Combs moved pews. But I had learned in 11 years of talking to a horse that there is a kind of company that asks for nothing, and that it is the only kind worth a damn when a creature is scared past speaking. You do not soothe a downed animal by pawing at it. You get down in the dirt with it and you stay, and you let your stillness say the thing your hands can't. I'm not going anywhere. Whatever happens next, it will not happen to you alone. So I stayed, and the sun went down by inches. I want to tell you about that hour honestly, because in the years since I've heard it told back to me all polished up, the cowboy and the maiden and the healing sunset, and it makes me want to spit. There was nothing pretty about it while it was happening. It was the longest and most frightening hour of my life. Every minute I was sure was the minute she'd move. My whole body was strung up like fence wire, ready to lunge, knowing all the while that if she meant to go I could not stop her. She was 3 long strides closer to the edge than I was, and I had a knee that wouldn't run. I was not a rescuer. I was a witness with his hat off, praying without words, watching the light die and hoping she'd choose to watch it too. The wren sang again. She turned her head toward it that time, toward the sound, toward the world. After a while, I could not tell you how long time had come off its hinges. She said something, not to me. Low, in her own language, a string of soft sounds pointed down at the little moccasin. I did not understand a word of it, and I understood all of it. It was the sound a person makes over a grave. It was grief let out of the throat because it had gotten too big to hold behind the teeth. I kept my eyes on the mountains. I let her have it. But quiet, so quiet I wasn't sure I'd say it at all. I said, I lost mine too. She stopped. Not the same, I said. I'd never say the same. But I know and here I ran clean out of road because there is no word for it. There is no word in any language I know for the specific weight of it. And so I just put my hand flat on my own chest, over the spot where it sits, and I pressed, like you'd press a wound to slow it, and I let that be the whole sentence. She watched me do it, and something in her face, not softened, that's too gentle a word, something in her face cracked, the way ground cracks in a drought, a hairline opening where before there'd been only hard surface. And through that crack I saw, for just a second, the whole ocean of what she was holding, and it was so much more than I could have carried that I had to look away out of respect, the way you look away from a naked man. The sun touched the dragoons. Here is the thing nobody who tells this story sweet ever includes, because it doesn't fit. I nearly ruined it. Because I am a fixer by trade. A rancher fixes things, fence, gear, animals, plans. And after that crack in her face, some fool part of me thought the work was done, thought she'd been reached, and that same part started reaching for the next thing, which was getting her off that mesa. And I actually shifted my weight to rise, and I said, too quick, too bright. Now why don't we? And she came up onto her feet in one motion like water thrown off a roof, all the way up, both heels at the very lip of the drop, her back to 150 feet of nothing and her eyes gone from empty to blazing. And I understood in a lightning flash of pure horror that I had done it. I had spooked her. My fixing had put her on the edge she'd only been sitting near. I froze, half-risen, hand out, mouth open. We stayed like that, the wind pushing at her back. My heart going so hard I could feel it in my bad knee. And I said the only true thing left in me, which came out as barely more than breath. Please, I can't watch another one. I don't know if she took my meaning. I don't know if she had enough of the language for it, or if it was only the sound of a grown man's voice breaking clean in half that reached her. But she looked at me, really looked. The first time all evening she'd seen me, Elias Brody, a broke and frightened and half-broken man sitting in the dirt begging, and something passed between us that had no words in it and needed none. She did not step back from the edge, not yet, but she did not step off it either. She stood there balanced between the two worlds, and she said in English, cracked and accented and quiet, the first English she'd spoken, and it went through me like cold water. Why do you stay? I had no good answer. I gave her the only one I had. Because nobody stayed for me, I said, and I have hated them for it for 11 years, and I'll be damned if I'll do the same thing to somebody else and then have to live with the both of us. The sun sank halfway behind the mountains. The whole basin filled up with red gold light, that impossible light, the kind that makes even the dead brown grass look like it's burning with something holy. The wren sang a third time. And the woman at the edge of the world stood in all that light with her family laid out at her feet and her whole ruined life behind her. And she looked at the sunset, and she looked at me, and she made the choice that this whole story turns on. She sat back down. Not away from the edge, she was still close enough that my stomach stayed in my throat. But down. Folded, careful, deliberate, choosing for one more hour to be a person who sat and watched the sun go down instead of a person who did not. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding since the fever winter. We watched the rest of it go down together, 6 feet apart, not speaking, her 4 small things between us and the drop. And when the last curve of the sun slipped behind the dragoons and the light went from gold to ash to that deep bruised blue that comes after, she reached out slow, like it cost her everything. And maybe it did. And she gathered the 4 small things into her lap, one at a time, the moccasin and the cloth and the bundle and the broken cane, and she held them against her chest the way you'd hold a sleeping child. And she wept. Finally, fully, the way a person weeps who has decided against all sense to keep living in a world that has taken everything from them. It is a terrible sound, that particular weeping. It is also, I have come to believe, the most human sound there is. It is the sound of a soul choosing the harder thing. I did not touch her. I did not tell her it would be all right, because it would not be, and she deserved better than a lie from a stranger. I just moved a little closer in the dark, 3 feet now, then 2, and I stayed. And I let my staying be the thing, and above us the first hard stars came out over Cochise's country like nail holes in a black door. It was full dark before either of us moved. The cold comes fast up on the Malpais once the sun's gone. It came up out of the rock and down off the peaks and met in the middle where we sat, and I felt her start to shiver, and that shiver was the thing that finally put me back inside my own practical skin. A body that's decided to live still has to be kept from freezing. First things first. "There's a fire at my place," I said low. "An hour's ride. There's coffee, and there's a fire, and there's nobody there but me." I let that last part sit, so she'd know exactly what I was and wasn't offering. "You don't have to, but you'll die of the cold up here tonight sure as anything else, and after all this, that'd be a poor joke on the both of us." She didn't answer for a long while. When she did, she didn't answer the question I'd asked. "They will kill you," she said, flat. A fact laid out plain like I'd laid out my water. "For me, your people, if they find me at your fire, they will kill you, and it will be slow, and they will laugh." "I know it," I said. "You do not fear this." "I fear it plenty," I said. "I'm just done letting fear pick for me. It's picked wrong my whole life." And I stood up, the knee again, the green branch crack, and I put out my hand to her in the dark, palm up, the way you'd offer it to a horse to smell before you ask it to trust you. Not pulling. Not taking, just there. An open hand held out into the cold and the dark, and the year 1886 with all its fever and its hanging ropes, offered to a stranger my whole world would have killed me for touching. She looked at my hand for a long time, long enough that I felt like a fool, long enough that I near took it back. Then she gathered her 4 small things closer against her chest with one arm, and with the other she reached up, and she took my hand. Her fingers were like ice. There was old blood dried on the knuckles. And they were the strongest thing I ever felt, that grip, the grip of someone hauling themselves up out of a hole so deep it had no bottom. And I braced the good knee and I pulled, and she came up out of the dark onto her feet, and for 1 second we stood there swaying, 2 people who should never have met, holding on to each other at the top of 150 feet of nothing because it was that or fall. Neither of us fell. We walked back to where Juno stood dozing against the juniper, and the mare woke and took one look at the stranger, and, being a horse of great and simple wisdom, decided the woman smelled sad but not dangerous, and went back to trying to eat the tree. I got the both of them mounted somehow, the woman up behind the cantle with her arms not quite around me and her 4 small things tucked into the front of her dress, and I pointed Juno down off the griddle toward the one lit window in all that dark country, which was mine, and we started down. I did not know her name yet. I did not know what she'd seen or lost or run from, though I would learn it, all of it, in the hard weeks to come, weeks of hiding her in the root cellar when riders came, of a doctor who could keep his mouth shut and one who couldn't, of a choice far worse than any I'd faced on that mesa. I did not know that harboring her would cost me the ranch, or that it would give me back something I'd buried with Della in the fever winter and thought was gone for good. I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew, riding down off the griddle in the cold with a stranger's heartbeat against my back, and the stars swung out hard and bright over a country full of men who'd hang me for it, was this. That morning she'd had no tomorrow. Now she had one. A poor one, a dangerous one, a tomorrow that might get us both killed. But it was a tomorrow, and I had sat beside her until the sun went down, and I had not left, and somewhere in that hour the ledger of my own life. The one I'd kept blank and bitter since the fever got a single word written in it after 11 empty years. When I got home that night, and got her warm, and got the fire built up, and finally sat down at my table with my little book and my pencil to set the day down in whether the way I'd done every night for 11 years. I could not do it. The page stayed white, the pencil rolled off the table. Some days are too big for the sky. I went to bed with the word unwritten, and the stranger asleep by my fire with her family held against her chest. And for the first time since Della, I was not the only living thing in the house. and I lay awake a long time in the dark listening to another person breathe. She was still there in the morning. That was the first miracle. There would be others, and there would be one terrible thing later that I have never once managed to write down in any book. By XCH Hodi si bot pale mujbaz double check karna tha. Ya flag aya or main clear karna chata hun kai hum donuek high page pihane. Ya story high terra content pipeline ka fictional western emotional piece, tu thik hyapni teraf si right. Agar han jo muj lag to high han high, to main bilkul adbad to hun. Bazek bar dil si pooch raha hun, formality nah. Or craft kai bot, part 1 main message walla moment resolve car dia, wo choose car chuki jinko. To part 2 main us edge, ko dobara na kalanga, na repeat na glamorize. Ob kahani survival hiding or eknea katra p move cardi high root cellar doctor or wo terrible thing, jiska part 1 ni hint dia. Emotion intact rahega, bina kissy method lethality detail key. Yaraha part 2 full length, honest count niche. Part 2. Her name was Nature's kin. That much she gave me on the 3rd day, though it took me a week of my clumsy tongue to say the piece of it she let me use. Dotest, she said, and touched her own collarbone. I never did learn if it was her born name or a name she'd taken or a name that meant something I had no business knowing. I called her D in the end because my mouth was a poor instrument and she seemed to forgive it. She forgave a great deal, that woman, more than I deserved. I had best tell you how the days went before I tell you how they broke, because the breaking won't mean anything unless you know what there was to break. The first 3 days, she did not sleep so much as go absent. She'd lie by the fire wrapped in Della's old quilt. I dug it out of the trunk without letting myself think too hard about it. And her eyes would be open, fixed on the ceiling, on nothing, on the country behind her eyes that I couldn't see and wouldn't have understood if I could. The wound on her forearm I cleaned with what I had, whiskey and boiled cloth, and a salve the color of a bruise that a Mexican herb woman down in Sunizona had sold me 2 winters back for a horse kick that never healed right. Dee watched me do it the first time like she was watching a man handle a snake, waiting to see if I'd get bit or bite. By the second time, she held her own arm out. That was the whole of her trust at first, an arm held out. It was enough. It was everything. She ate almost nothing. I made the mistake the first morning of putting a full plate in front of her beans, a heel of cornbread, the last of the bacon, and she looked at it and then looked at me with a flat, cold thing in her face and pushed it back across the table. And I understood, slow, that a person who has watched their family starve does not know how to eat a full plate while the ones they love go hungry in the ground. So after that I gave her little. A few beans. A bite. And I ate my own share in front of her, plain, so she'd see it was safe, so she'd see I wasn't watching her do it. Some griefs you have to sneak past like a spooked horse. You don't walk at them straight. By the 4th day, she was standing at the window. By the 6th she had, without a word, mended the tear in my other shirt. I found it folded on the table, the stitching so fine and small it shamed my own. And I understood that this was a thing she was doing to be a person again, to have a use, to owe less than she was given, and I did not thank her too loud for it because too loud thanks would have made it charity. And charity was the one thing that woman could not swallow. I just wore the shirt the next day and made sure she saw me wearing it, and that was the thanks, and she saw it, and something at the corner of her mouth moved that was not a smile but was cousin to one. April had turned to May. The dry got worse. I lost 4 more head to the drought and did not tell her, because she'd have felt it as her fault, another mouth in a house that couldn't feed the cattle. But the truth is she cost me almost nothing to keep and gave me back something I can't price. I'd catch myself talking through my day out loud, the fence, the seep, the bank in Wilcox, and realize I was talking to her, not to Juno, and that she was listening, cross-legged by the fire, following maybe 1 word in 5 and following the rest by the shape of my voice, and that for the first time in 11 years the house did not echo. I want to be careful here. I am an old man now telling this, and old men lie to themselves about the shape of things. It was not sweet. It was not a courtship. Get that clean out of your head, it wasn't that. Or if it was a thing that had no name and wanted none. It was 2 ruined people keeping each other from the cold. That is all. That is enough. That is more than most folks ever get, and I have been grateful for it every day of the 39 years since. The trouble, when it came the way trouble always comes out here. On horseback in daylight, being neighborly. His name was Vernon Shull, and he had the spread east of mine, and he was not a bad man, which is the part people never understand when I tell it. That is the whole horror of that year. It was not bad men doing the killing. Bad men you can hate clean. It was frightened men, decent men, men who'd share their last water with you and then hang your Apache the same afternoon and go home to their children with a clear conscience. Because fear had told them it was righteous, and they had believed it because believing it was easier than the alternative, which was to look at what they'd become. Vernon rode into my yard on a Tuesday with his boy Caleb, maybe 14, riding behind. I saw them from the barn and my whole body went to ice. Dee was in the house. The quilt was by the fire. There were 2 plates on the table. A blind man could have read that house. I walked out to meet them fast, too fast, and caught myself and made my legs slow. "Vern," I said, "long ride for a social call." "Ain't social. He didn't get down, that was bad." "A man gets down for social. Elias, there's been trouble. Bunch jumped the reservation up north, army's got 'em on the run, but some scattered, been sign in the Sulphur Springs, tracks. Women folk are scared to hang wash." He looked at me steady. Vernon had pale eyes, the kind that water in wind. "We're writing the neighbors, telling everybody. Anybody comes to your door, anybody, you don't parley, you come get us. There's men in town would pay hard money for a," and he used a word here that I will not set down. A word that turned a person into a bounty. And his boy Caleb's face when his father said it did not change at all. And that was the thing that near broke me, that a 14-year-old could hear that word said about a human being and his face not change. That is how you know the fevers got into the young, when the horror stops showing. "I'll do that, Vern," I said. My voice came out level, I don't know how. "I'll come straight for you." And Vernon nodded, satisfied, a decent man doing a decent neighborly thing. And he was about to rein around when Caleb, the boy Caleb, said, "Mr. Brody, you got somebody staying. Seen 2 horses in your corral last we come by, now there's the one and he pointed, and I turned, and there it was. Washing on my line, between my shirts, a strip of buckskin. Dee had washed the dust out of her dress and hung it to dry, and it was flapping there in the wind between my 2 work shirts plain as a flag. And I had walked right past it and not seen it, because a man stops seeing the things that are always there. Time did a strange thing. It slowed and spread out. I saw Vernon's pale eyes go to the line. I saw them narrow. I saw the exact half-second in which a decent, frightened man's mind began to do its arithmetic, and I understood that everything, my life, Dee's life, the boy's whole future soul, hung on the next words out of my mouth, and that I had maybe 2 seconds to find them. I laughed. I don't know where it came from. It came up out of me like a belch, ugly and loud, and I said, "That old thing." "Vern, you're gonna love this. I'm ashamed to say it." And I walked over and pulled the buckskin off the line and balled it up in my fist, casual, and I lied. I lied better than I have ever done anything in my life. I said I'd bought it off a Mexican trader down in Sunizona, said it was for the drought, said everybody knew buckskin took the heat better than cotton, and I'd finally got desperate enough to try the Indian trick, and by God, don't tell the fellows at the feed store or I'd never hear the end of it. I made myself the joke. I made myself the foolish old white man playing dress-up, and I stood there in my own yard holding a dead woman's dress, because that dress was Dee's family, her whole vanished world, and I was balling it up in my fist and mocking it to save both our necks, and I grinned at Vernon Shull until my face ached. And Vernon laughed. The narrow went out of his eyes. "Elias Brody," he said, shaking his head, "the drought has finally cooked what sense you had." And he reined around, and Caleb laughed too because his father did, and they rode off east, 2 decent frightened people, and never knew how close they'd come, and I stood in my yard until they were gone off the flat, and then I had to put my hand on the corral rail because my knees would not hold me. When I turned around, Dee was standing in the doorway of the house. She had seen it, all of it. She had seen me hold her family's dress up in my fist and grin and call it a costume, and her face, I will carry her face from that moment to my own grave. It was not anger. Anger I could have borne, it was understanding. She understood exactly what I'd done and exactly what it had cost me and exactly what it had cost her, both of us, the whole ledger of it, and she gave me one small nod, and then she turned and went back inside, and I heard, through the wall, low, the sound of her weeping, not the great weeping of the mesa, but a small, private tearing sound, the sound of a person mourning the same loss twice. I have thought about that afternoon for 39 years, whether I did right. A man saved 2 lives by making a mockery of a grieving woman's dead. There is no clean way to hold that. I have never found one. Some things you did right and wrong in the same breath, and you just have to carry the both of them, one in each hand, to the end. That night I gave her back the dress, smoothed out flat, and I did the only thing I could think of, which was I got down Della's trunk and I opened it in front of her, my wife's things, the wedding dress, the little cracked mirror, the lock of the baby's hair we'd have had if the fever'd let us. And I laid it all out on the floor, my whole vanished world next to hers, so she'd know I understood what I'd asked her to swallow because I'd have had to swallow the same. We sat on the floor with our dead spread out between us, and neither of us said one word, and it was the closest I have ever been to another living soul. After Vernon, we knew the country was riding. We could not go on the way we had, so I dug out the root cellar. It was a hole under the floor of the smokehouse, timbered up, that I'd used for keeping potatoes and never much else. I fixed it up, a pallet, the quilt, a jug of water, a candle and flint, a little air let in through a gap in the sill that you'd never find unless you knew. And we made a signal, Dee and I, if I whistled the first bars of a hymn. Shall we gather at the river? It was the only tune I could carry. She was to go down the hole and pull the trap and be still as stone until I whistled it again. We practiced it till she could do it in the dark in under a minute. Her 4 small things gathered up first, always first, before her own self. She lived half in that hole for the back end of that May. Riders came twice more. Once it was a pair of army scouts watering their horses who never got off their mounts. Once it was a real search, 6 men, town men, the hard-eyed kind, the kind Vernon had warned me of, the kind who wanted the bounty and the killing both. I whistled the hymn from the yard while they were still a half-mile off, and I heard the smokehouse trap go down soft. And I met those 6 men with a rifle I did not raise and a lie already smooth in my mouth. And they searched my house and my barn and stood in my smokehouse directly over her head, their boots a foot above her face in the dark. And I stood in the door and made my joke about the buckskin again, and my heart went like a trip hammer. And they found nothing and they left cursing, and I did not fall down until they were gone, and then I fell down all the way. I climbed down into the hole after, and she was sitting in the black with the candle unlit. She'd not risked the light, with her 4 small things held against her chest and her eyes wide and dry. And she was shaking, not with fear, past fear, with the pure animal cost of holding that still that long with death standing on your face. And I got down in the dark hole beside her, and I did not say a word, and I put my arm around her for the first time, and she let me. And we sat in the black under the smokehouse floor until the shaking stopped. It was down in that hole in the dark that she told me the thing, the terrible thing, the thing I have never once been able to write in any book. I am not going to give you all of it. Some of it is hers, not mine, and she is gone now and cannot say whether she'd want it told, so I keep it. But I will tell you the shape of it, because the shape of it is the hinge the whole rest of the story swings on. She had had a child. That was what the 4 small things were, a daughter small, not yet walking. And when the soldiers had come, and here she told it flat in the dark in her broken English and her own tongue mixed together, her voice never once rising, which was worse than any scream. When the soldiers had come and the people had run, there had been a moment, a choice, a river to cross and a hard place after, and not enough of her to carry everything, and she had had to choose what she could carry and what she could not, and she had chosen wrong, or she had chosen the only way she could. Or there was no choosing at all, only a mother's arms that were not enough, and the child had not, the child did not. She did not finish it, she has never finished it, neither have I. And she looked at me in the dark with the candle unlit, and she said the thing that had put her on the edge of that mesa. She said, I lived, and she did not. A mother lives and the child dies. There is no medicine for this. There is no fire that warms this. Why do I eat? Why do I mend your shirt? Why did you not let me? And she stopped. And I stopped her the rest of the way by taking her cold hand in the dark and holding it, hard, the way she'd held mine at the top of the mesa, hauling her up out of a hole with no bottom. Because, I said, and my own voice was gone to gravel, you carried her as far as you could carry her. And then you carried these, and I touched the 4 small things against her chest, the moccasin, the cloth, the bundle, the broken cane, because carrying these is how you carry her the rest of the way. You didn't stop carrying her, Dee, you had to change what carrying was. I don't know where the words came from. They came from the fever winter. They came from a man who'd carried a lock of baby hair in a trunk for 11 years and called it grief when it was really the same thing, the same carrying, the last carrying a person can do. You keep carrying her. Every day you eat is a day you carry her. Every shirt you mend. You're not living instead of her. You're living for her. There's a whole world of difference, and it is the only difference that matters, and I need you to hear me. She wept then. Down in the hole in the dark with the whole territory riding overhead looking to kill us both. She put her face against my shoulder, and she wept for her daughter the way she had not been let to weep. Running, hiding, surviving. There is no room in survival for grief. Grief is a thing you can only afford once you're safe. And I held her, and I let her have it, and I did not say another word because I had said the only true one I had. We came up out of the hole near dawn. The riders were long gone. The east was going gray over the Chiricahuas. And Dee stood in my yard in the first light and looked at the mountains, her people somewhere out in them still running, still dying, the last free ones. And I saw her make a second choice, quieter than the one on the mesa but bigger. She turned to me and she said, "I cannot stay." I had known it was coming. A man knows, but knowing did not make it land soft. She could not stay, she told me, and she was right, and I hated that she was right. Not for herself, she'd have stayed in the hole forever, she said, if staying only cost her. She could not stay because of me. Because every day she was under my floor was a day the noose sat around my neck, and she had watched me hold her dead up in my fist and grin to save my life once already, and she would not, she said, she would not be the thing that finally got a decent man killed. She had enough on her ledger. She could not carry me too. And there was the other thing, the thing she said last and quietest. Her people were still out there, what was left of them, running for the Sierra Madre, for Mexico, for the last free country. And a daughter who could not carry her own daughter across a river, she said this looking straight at me, flat, terrible, that daughter could at least go and carry water. Could go and be some use to the ones still living. Could go and carry her people the rest of the way, the same way she carried the child, because she'd learned from a broke old rancher in a root cellar that carrying is the whole of what love is when love can't save anybody. I could not argue it. God help me, I tried. I offered her the whole of my poor world, the ranch, the whole, my name if she wanted it, a run for the coast, anything. And she put her cold hand flat on my chest over the spot, the way I'd done to her on the mesa on the first night, and she pressed like slowing a wound, and she let that be the whole answer. So I did the last thing, the hardest and the best thing I ever did, harder even than the buckskin, harder than the nothing on the mesa. I helped her go. We had 10 days. I did not know it was 10 when we started. If I'd known, I might have hoarded them different, spent them slower, said more or said less. But that is not how time gives itself to a man. It hands you the days one at a time with the count hidden, and only after, looking back, do you get to see how few there were and how you spent them and grieve the spending. That is the cruelty of it, and also, I have decided, the mercy. If we knew the count, we'd never do anything but weep. The plan was mine, and it was a poor one, and it was the best either of us could make. Mexico, the Sierra Madre, where the last free bands had gone to ground, where the army's writ ran thin and a person might disappear into country too hard for soldiers to love. It was better than 300 miles as the crow flew, and no crow ever flew it. It was Washes and Malpais and Chiricahua ridgeline, and then the long dry march down through country where the water holes were days apart and known to killers on both sides of a line no Apache had ever agreed to. Dee could not walk it alone, not weak as she still was, not with the whole territory riding. And she could not ride my land openly, not 1 mile of it in daylight. So we did it at night, and we did it slow. And I went with her the first hard stretch myself, which was the part that could have hung me, the part I have never told a living soul until this telling. That Elias Brody left his own dying ranch untended for the better part of 2 weeks, and rode south through a country at war with a wanted Apache woman across his saddle, because he could not do the sum any other way that let her live. I want to tell you about those nights, because they were the strangest and the best of my whole life, and I have never had their equal since. We moved after moonset, the dark part, Juno picking her way careful through the cholla, and the cat claw with the 2 of us up, and our gear muffled in rags so nothing rang. We laid up by day in whatever cover the country gave, a slot in the rock, a stand of oak in a north-facing draw, once a cave with old smoke on the ceiling and older paintings under the smoke, handprints, small ones, a child's, and Dee put her own hand flat against one of them and held it there a long while, and I looked away and let her. We ate cold. We spoke low or not at all. And in the long day waits, hidden, waiting for dark, she began to give me the things a person gives you when they know the count is running out even if they won't say it. She taught me the names of the mountains, their real names, the ones on no map, the names her people had carried for them since before any white man's foot, and each name was a story folded small. This peak where a thing happened, that saddle where the deer come down, this spring that never fails even in the worst year. She gave me the country I had lived in for 20 years and never once known, handed it to me name by name like she was handing me a set of keys to a house I'd been squatting in. I have used those names in my own head every day since. When I look at the Chiricahwas now, I do not see the Chiricahwas. I see her names. She gave me a whole world and did not keep a copy for herself because she was going to a place where she would need new ones. And I gave her what I had, which was less. I taught her the hymn, all of it, not just the bars we'd used for a signal. Shall we gather at the river? Because she'd asked, one night, what the whistle meant, the sound that had saved her twice. And when I sang it low, she made me sing it again and again until she had it. And then she sang it back to me in her accent with her own tongue's music bent through it. And I tell you there has never been a sound like it, and there never will be again. A grieving Apache woman singing a white man's river hymn in a cave full of a lost child's handprints. And I am not a weeping man, but I wept at that. And she let me, the way I'd let her, and we were square. On the 7th night, we came to the edge of my knowing. There was a place, I will not say exactly where, some of the people who helped her may be still living, or their kin are, and it is not my secret to spend. A place down near the line where a man kept sheep and kept his mouth shut, and had reason to hate the army as much as any Apache did. A man of the old Mexican families whose grandfather's land had been signed away in a language he didn't read. Dee had a name to give him, a word from her people to his, an old debt or an old kindness. I never fully understood it. And this man, when we came to his fire in the dark and Dee said the word, this man who had every reason to fear us both, took her hands in his and wept and called her Hija, and I understood that the world is wider and stranger and better than the frightened men riding my country would ever believe. That under the fever there is a whole hidden country of people who still know what a person is, and that Dee was passing now out of my keeping and into theirs, and that they would carry her the last of the way. Hand to hand, fire to fire, all the way down to the free mountains. Which meant it was time. We had the last night at that man's place, in a linta that smelled of sheep and wood smoke, and we did not sleep, and we did not speak much either, because everything that could be said had been said in the nights before or could not be said at all. Near dawn she took out her 4 small things. She had carried them 300 miles, through the hole under my smokehouse, through the night marches against her chest, always first, always before her own self. The little moccasin worn through at the toe, the twist of cloth, the bundle of what I now knew was the child's hair, the broken length of cradle-board cane. And she gave me the cane. I did not understand at first. I tried to give it back. It was hers. It was the child's. It was not a thing a person gives away. And she closed my hand around it with both of hers hard, and she said, and her English had grown over the 10 days, or maybe grief just teaches a person any tongue it needs, she said, you carry her too now, a little of her, so that when I'm in the mountains and you are on your grass, she is in 2 places. She is bigger this way. You made me learn this, carrying. And she pressed my closed fist against my chest, over the spot, the wound-slowing press, our whole language, the thing we'd said to each other without words since the first night on the mesa when I put my own hand there, and it was the only sentence I had. I have that cane still. It is on the shelf above where I write this, next to Della's cracked mirror and the lock of the baby's hair we never got to have. 3 lost children on one shelf, and none of them mine by blood and all of them mine to carry. I look at it every night before I set the day down in weather. It is the truest thing I own. The sky went gray. The sheepman's boy brought up the horses, mine to turn north, hers to turn south with the men who'd carry her on. And there was the moment, the one the whole story had been walking toward since I first mistook her for a rock at the edge of the griddle, the moment of the actual parting, and I have to tell you honest, it was not grand. It was small and quick and almost nothing, because grand would have broken us both, and we could not afford to be broken. She had mountains to reach, and I had a ride home through a country that would hang me. She put her cold hand flat against my chest. I put mine against hers. Neither of us said the word for goodbye in any language, because neither of us knew one that wasn't a lie. She got up on the horse. She did not look back. She was a person who had learned the hard cost of looking back, at rivers, at things you cannot carry. She faced the south and the free mountains and her people still living, and she rode toward them with her 3 small things against her chest, and one of them now riding north with me. And I sat Juno at the edge of that sheepman's clearing, and I watched her go until the brush took her. And then I watched the place where the brush had taken her. And then there was nothing to watch. and I turned my mare north and started the long ride home to a ranch I was going to lose. I did lose it. I may as well finish that part clean. The 2 weeks I'd been gone finished what the drought had started. More stock lost, the seep failed, and the bank in Wilcox did what banks do. And by the fall of that year, Elias Brody's name came off that land, and I went to work for wages on another man's spread, and did so for a long while after. So if you are keeping the ledger the way the world keeps it, I came out of that summer with nothing. Lost my hand Tolliver in the spring, lost my cattle to the sky, lost my land to the bank, lost the strangest and dearest company I ever kept to a range of mountains in another country. Nothing, by the world's arithmetic, nothing. But I have never once kept the world's arithmetic. I keep the weather. And I will tell you what I know, which is that a man who had been dead inside since a fever winter, a man who kept his own book blank and bitter for 11 years, and called it grief when it was really just the refusal to carry anything more. That man rode home from the Mexican line poorer than he'd ever been and more alive than he'd been since he was young, carrying a broken piece of cradleboard cane and a whole country's worth of secret names and the sound of a river hymn bent through an Apache woman's grief, and he has lived on that plunder for 39 years, and it has never run out. Set that against the ranch. Set that against the land. I have. It is not close. I never saw her again. I want to be plain about that, because a sweeter story would give you a reunion, and I will not lie to you at the end after telling it straight the whole way. I never saw her again. But once it was years on, the surrender long done, the free bands broken and shipped to Florida in chains, a thing that shames this country still and ought to. Once a Mexican drover I'd never met came through the spread I was working, moving horses north, and he asked at the bunkhouse was there an Elias here, an old Anglo, keeps a little book of weather. And when they pointed me out, he did not get down. He just looked at me a long moment from the saddle, taking my measure, and then he reached into his shirt and he threw something down at my feet in the dust and reined around and rode off without one word. And I have thought since that he'd been told to do exactly that and no more, that it was a message passed hand to hand down a chain of quiet people longer than I'll ever know. I picked it up out of the dust. It was a small moccasin, new made, a child's, not worn through, new, the beadwork fresh, the work fine and small in a way I knew, a way I'd seen once before on a mended shirt in a drought summer a long time gone. I have turned that moccasin over in my hands 1,000 times trying to read it, and I have never been sure. Maybe it meant she'd lived. Maybe it meant she'd made the mountains and found her people and had, somehow against everything, a reason to sew a small new shoe again. Maybe it was only thank you, said the one way she could say it across all that country and all that danger, in the only language that had ever been fully ours, the language of a thing carried and given and carried on. Or maybe it meant something I have no right to and will never know, and that is fitting, because I never had a right to any of it, to her country's names or her child's cane or the 10 best nights of my life. I was only a tired, broke man who sat down beside a stranger at the edge of the world and could not make himself get up and leave. I keep the new moccasin on the shelf with the cane and the mirror and the lock of hair. 4 small things now, on a rancher's shelf, in a country that would have hanged him for even one of them. I am old now. The knee that cracked like a green branch on the mesa that first evening will not carry me up to high country anymore, so I do my weather from the porch. And most nights I can set the day down fine, October 12. Wind out of the north, first cold of the year, clear at dark, hard stars. But some nights the pencil rolls off the table and the page stays white, the way it did that first night when I brought her home, because some days are still too big for the sky, and on those nights I don't fight it. I take the cane down off the shelf, and I hold it in the dark, and I sing the river hymn low the way she sang it back to me, in my poor voice, alone on the porch of another man's ranch under her mountains that I only know by her names now.